I feel like telling an Ultima fanboy that no, Ultima was not all that influential is just ripping off this decade old band aid. You know, this refusal to move on, to grow up, to understand that Ultima is a relic of the 80s. You know, a relic of the time before Nintendo introduced the Nintendo Entertainment System to North America and dominated the gaming landscape. Ultima is just a product of its time. It's not influential, it's not interesting, it's not engaging, it's not some top tier RPG. It's something that boomers played back in the day and hyped up to be something spectacular. You know, it's like, Game of Thrones today or something mediocre, uninspired. It's just D&D. You know, in a lot of ways, it's the Baldur's Gate 3 of its time. So much so that people even make comparisons to it. But one of the things I've really found interesting about the Ultima phenomenon, right? The narrative that this is some like grand, amazing series, to please pay no attention to the fact that Ultima 9 exists and that Ultima 8 had plenty of glitches. Like, please, please, please pay no attention to the fact that this series is super niche, that no one plays or remembers it today. It's influential, man. The narrative I've heard is that Ultima was a major inspiration for The Legend of Zelda. I've seen Sean Malmstrom come out with this a couple of times. I just checked Reset Era, and they said this. I checked some forums, and, a lot of people were assuring us it was true. Like, oh no, Ultima came first, and therefore Zelda was influenced by it. It was an RPG, bro. Like, and I went ahead and looked, did a little bit of research. I looked at a bunch of old Nintendo interviews, and yes, I was able to confirm that it wasn't actually true. Now, Zelda was not influenced by Ultima. It is its own entire thing. All the sources that people cite is just completely false. If you try and Google Zelda was inspired by Ultima, you end up with a Wikipedia article with no source, right? There is no indication that Zelda was ever intended to be an RPG. It was not in the same genre. It's not the same thing at all. And as a result of that, it really has nothing in common with Ultima at all other than the vague fantasy aesthetic. And considering Zelda has grown to be the greatest fantasy series in gaming, and I would argue all of fiction, considering it's expanded to the point, with dozens of all-time classic games, while Ultima is just a relic, a fucking dinosaur, a series that was falling off even before Richard Garriott sold out to EA. Like, when you look at on how relevant The Legend of Zelda is, how iconic the games are, how many of them are considered the greatest of all time, you really start to realize that the narrative that Ultima is some like major cultural phenomenon, that it was this huge influential thing, is completely and utterly false. It had no influence on The Legend of Zelda at all. They're not similar in any way, shape, and form. And D&D, Baldur's Gate 3, well, same difference. These D&D knockoffs, whether they're Baldur's Gate or Ultima or Wizardry, all they have going for them is that they were made for adults and had a generic fantasy element. So you could like LARP as if you were like in Lord of the Rings or something. There was no creativity. There wasn't any like solid world building. It wasn't good. They couldn't keep up the momentum, and they especially couldn't branch out into consoles where the real competition was. That's right. PC gaming is and always has been completely irrelevant. The idea that there was some hidden world of like, a crazy game of crazy games for adults is a complete and total cope. It always has been. So, considering what happened with Ultima, which was very quickly outstripped by the Dragon Quest games in relevancy and popularity and influence in the industry. Dragon Quest actually was influenced by Ultima, by the way. You can clearly see, like, just what has happened here. Because Ultima isn't remembered because it's some like grand spectacular game that defies expectations and like was a real trendsetter. It wasn't something that was like influenced a lot of things, other than Dragon Quest, which every other JRPG was more influenced by Dragon Quest specifically. Um, it wasn't that big of a deal in and of itself, right? But the reason it's so fondly remembered is because the Western gaming industry does not like admitting that they have contributed absolutely nothing to the industry at large. They have no relevant IPs, they have no franchises, no mascot characters, no original ideas, right? They are the scum of the earth. All they have going for them is this idea that Doom was the first person shooter ever, or that Ultima predated Dragon Quest. Like, when you take that away from them, when you really look at what these games are, when you watch Spoonie's little videos, right, you just kind of realize to yourself that, like, wow, these games they're hyped up to be. When you look at like what people are playing today, how they're still playing the original Super Mario Bros, the original Legend of Zelda, a lot of their subsequent entries, right? When you look at how many of these games are so popular and influential today, and then you look at Ultima, you see this world of difference. You see a game that's only propped up by boomers who want to downplay the far more influential and popular Dragon Quest and Legend of Zelda, right? That's all this is. That's all it comes down to. It's a Western elitist attitude from a bunch of 40-year-old fucks who cannot move on with their lives, who have to believe that their childhood was better and that they got to experience all these amazing games that no one else has ever heard of, when all of it is just a complete gigantic cope. If these games were so great, they would still be played by people today, but they're not. Nobody talks about them outside of just these delusional hard PC gaming circles, people who want to believe these games are more relevant than they actually are, that they left far more of an impact than they actually did, and that they're remembered by more people than they actually are. Like, to me, looking into this and seeing the web of lies kind of unravel, like I can't take Ultima seriously anymore. I can't take the fans seriously. I can't take the narrative series. Like, why would I respect Ultima after seeing the fans spend decades trying to gaslight people into thinking, a lot of my favorite games are lesser because they didn't come first? That would be like if I said that like the Atari 2600 has to be better than the NES because it's an like, no, Atari was lame. NES like stomped that company for a reason. There's a reason Atari doesn't exist anymore. There's a reason Xbox is leaving the industry. There's a reason PlayStation is not competitive. There's a reason Steam isn't relevant. There's a reason Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom outperformed Baldur's Gate 3, the successor to Ultima. The reality is, Nintendo is simply better than these other inferior Western creators, and that really needs to be understood by these boomers, is that I don't care about Ultima. I don't want to hear about it anymore. I'm never going to play these games. I would much rather anticipate the inevitable release of Nintendo Switch 2 and its own slew of original amazing RPGs, all of which are better than Ultima 6.